my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello BYWG tribe, here's a quick peek at our supplement, product, and book of the month for December 2019. At the end of the podcast, I will spend a few minutes going into further detail, so we encourage you to listen to the end and check it out. The supplement of the month is not just one of our premium formulations, but the entire line. Yes, for the month of December, the entire BYWG nutrition line is 10% off using the code all lowercase letters BYWG GIFT. The product of the month for December is dry farm wines. Look out for holiday specials, and the link to receive a penny bottle of wine will be in the show notes and weekly emails. The book of the month for December is Keto for Life by Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns. Keep in mind all the links, discount codes, and special offers for the product, supplement, and book will be listed in the show notes and iTunes, posted on the social media, in our weekly newsletter, and on our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com at the Listen Now tab. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. I'm your co-host today, Dr. Mike Akinfora, and I am thrilled to have on with me Dr. Diana Driscoll. Diana, how are you?
I am doing great, Mike. Thanks so much. And it's an honor to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. I'm going to read Diana's bio and her unique story, and then we're going to dive right in. So Diana Driscoll is an internationally recognized researcher, inventor, speaker, author, and patient advocate. An optometrist by education, she was disabled for over a decade with invisible illnesses. Now, fully recovered, she's a recipient of 2 patents to date and continues her research as president of Genetic Disease Investigators. She is the founder and clinical director of POTS Care, and the only clinic dedicated to treating the underlying medical causes of POTS, not just the symptoms. She's also a partner at TJ Nutrition. Dr. Driscoll graduated summa cum laude from both the University of Houston College of Optometry and University of Texas at Austin. She is a geek and through and through. She's a member of the International Society of Neurovascular Disease, the American Headache Society, the Medical Advisory Board for EDS Network CARES, the American Optometrist Association, the Tear Film and Ocular Surface Society, and served as the medical director for the Ehlers-Danlos National Foundation. Her peer-reviewed medical abstracts include those involving vascular abnormalities in the fundus of POTS patients, the etiology of left ventricular diastolic dysfunction, and the use of, that's a big word, acetazolamide in multiple sclerosis. She's the author of the Driscoll Theory, the publication revealing the propensity of high intracranial pressure in POTS patients that dramatically altered how this condition was evaluated and treated. She is also the author of Your Eyes and EDS and was the chief author in Ophthalmology Medical Resource Guide for Ehlers-Danlos National Foundation. Dr. Driscoll is the recipient of numerous awards for patient advocacy and continues to donate her time to help others across the globe through her online forum and videos on YouTube. Her work in chronic inflammation, autonomic nervous system, and collagen disorders, as well as organic dysfunction, can help others live their best life, as well as have their best body and mind. It is a thrill to have you on the show. This is a really unique topic, and Diana, can you give people some background into that 10-year disability and how you got here?
Oh boy, yes. Well, I guess that intro, which thank you so much, that was very nice, kind of hinted at the geek level I had to get to answers. But Mike, I so didn't see this coming. I've been healthy my entire life as far as I could tell. I was avid exerciser. Nutrition was an interest of mine. And I was 46 before anything showed up that I could see. I went overseas to Costa Rica on a mission trip, and all of us got this virus, every single one of us, but I just couldn't pull out of it. And within weeks, I developed autonomic dysfunction. Basically, the autonomic nervous system just wasn't working well. It's what controls the systems of your body that you really shouldn't have to think about. So digestion, heart rate, blood pressure, for example, started to show things all over the place. Things were just jumping all over the place. I couldn't control my temperature. The difference between sitting down and standing became fairly dramatic, but over time it just continued to change, and it morphed into eventually to extreme fatigue. But it was so much more than that. Nothing in my body was really unaffected. I started out first, I couldn't sleep, and over time, it got to the point I couldn't stay awake. I had trouble breathing. It felt like I was breathing through a straw. I remember those first couple of years. I either had straw days, it felt like, or stir stick days, but I never had normal breathing. That was really frustrating. Sometimes I would eat, excuse me, and the food would just sit in my stomach for hours. I had a tremor. Again, the temperature change was horrible. Then my memory started to go. My ability to organize my thoughts, stay awake. At my worst, I was struggling to stay awake maybe 3 hours a day. Those 3 hours were even tough to stay awake. And yet, ironically, sometimes I couldn't sleep. There were times I was awake maybe 3 days straight. And as I got sicker, it just kept evolving and the symptoms kept changing. It was just like chasing a moving target. So I couldn't handle any stress. I couldn't answer the phone, for example. That sounds so easy, but it was just too stressful. I was light sensitive, sound sensitive. I was often in the bedroom with the shades drawn, lights out. I had earplugs on, and yet we just had no answers. I went to at least 50 doctors looking for what was wrong. And then about a year and a half or so into it, our son became also very, very ill, and he was completely disabled. He started to waste away. He developed severe osteoporosis. He broke his arms just throwing a ball once and putting on his coat. It was such a frightening time, Mike, but we had no answers and no one was able to help. So that was the beginning of a very long journey.
Well, I mean, it's bad enough when it's yourself, but when it's your child and you're going through it as well, I mean, that had to be horrifying.
It was horrifying. There was a time our son came to me when he was 9 years old, and he got sick when he was 8. So, and of course we had no idea what was going on, but he came to me one day and he said, I don't think I can keep going. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of suffering with what we were dealing with, but he said, I don't think I can go another day. And of course, we had no answers at that time, Mike. So all I could do was got down on his level. I looked him right in the eye and I told him, one, I know you're suffering. I know this is bad, but we are going to figure this out, and I will not give up until we find out what happened to us and how we can pull out of it. So, but yeah, back then I wish I'd had that crystal ball to look in the future and realize it was going to be okay. But it took 10 years to put it all together. So not an easy journey. Yeah.
It's okay. So this happens and it's a journey, and you have some background in medicine as an optometrist, correct?
Right.
So you start to search for what's going on.
Right.
Talk to me about that. What did you do? What did you do first? Like what?
Right.
How did that start? What does it look like?
Well, initially, honestly, the first 3.5 years or so of my illness, I depended on the experts to know what to do. I thought, this is not a subtle condition. It's not like, and I knew it wasn't a psychiatric condition. I was 46 years old. I knew my body. I knew my mind. I knew this wasn't me just having some sort of a panic attack or something. But I worked with the doctors. I worked with a few throughout the nation. I went to 6 pulmonologists. Eventually, I ended up at Mayo Clinic because I thought, these are the experts. These are the best minds in the world. They had studies going on with POTS. They did confirm a diagnosis of POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And I remember thinking, we got it. We know what this is. We have a label. We'll have validation, treatment plan, No, it really failed. They told me to increase salt. And I thought, okay, I'll do that for a while. They tried to slow down my heart, which was a really, really disastrous attempt, and nothing was getting better. In fact, I was getting worse every week. They put me in 3 of their clinical trials. They started one of their trials while I was there, Mike, because they said, you are a flaming case of POTS. We'd love to get this trial started while you're here, and they did. But at the end of that 3.5 years of working with them, I asked the head researcher, so throw me a bone here, give me something, anything you're thinking, because I am worse. Every year I was getting worse. And his response was, well, we think POTS patients are perfectly normal. They're just more aware of their own bodies. And that was the turning point, Mike. I looked at my husband and I just said, we're on our own.
Yep.
They don't have a clue how disabled I was, nor my son. And so we said, we're going to try to figure this out. And I took the money. I was getting disability from my professional disability, and we put it into studies. We started right away. And the first thing I did was I said, let's look in the eyes because, right, my area of comfort, you can see a lot of evidence of systemic illness by looking in the eyes. That just made sense to me, and no one was doing that. I don't exactly know why, but I remember thinking there is no way we can be this sick without something showing up somewhere. There's got to be an issue somewhere in the body. They're not looking in the right places. But although we started in the eyes, we didn't end up in the eyes. But it gave us next directions and years and years and years of clues, putting together those clues, trying to string together the answers. So, tough journey. The first thing we figured out, though, was we had high intracranial pressure. Okay. And relieving that pressure was amazing. I remember high-fiving the neurologist and his team saying, okay, I'm good. I can handle everything else at this point. Well, I couldn't, and the underlying issues were still getting worse. It was a huge relief to get that pressure off, but that problem was a secondary problem, so we still had to dig deeper.
So you're 3 years in, and you've gone to the best in probably the world.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you're left with your own determination.
Yes.
And going forward. You discover in your journey and in your research that relieving intracranial pressure helps.
Right.
But it's not the answer. It's
Correct.
not the intracranial pressure that's causing this. It's just a symptom or a side effect of it.
Correct.
So where do you go from there?
Right. Well, again, we saw some abnormalities in the eyes. It took me a while to put all that together. Quite the journey. But the next big reveal, the next big thing that made a difference was figuring out something was up with the vagus nerve. And I started to suspect the vagus nerve because my heart rate went wonky. I mean, my resting heart rate for a while was at 122. It was like I was jogging, most of the time. And my gut seemed to be affected at about the same time. And I made a list of every symptom I had and was trying to study what could tie some of these things together. And I remembered thinking, well, okay, the vagus nerve controls both heart rate and digestion. Could something be up with that? And started to explore that issue. And that was quite the journey also, because as it turned out, it wasn't exactly a vagus nerve problem. The vagus nerve problem was yet another secondary issue. It was actually a neurotransmitter problem, but we had to get that figured out.
Wow. All right. So let's just back up a second. There's a lot there, and this is really important because I am certain that there are folks that are being misdiagnosed here because it's so the vagus nerve affects so much. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to me a little bit about like what does the vagus nerve actually do?
Right. That's a good question. We take it for granted because it is one of the autonomic nerves. You shouldn't have to think about it. It should work on its own.
Right.
We shouldn't have to give it much thought, but it's the longest cranial nerve in the body. Of course, it's the parasympathetic nerve, the major parasympathetic nerve. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the calming system of the body. It's the rest and digest system of the body. But, it allows the heart rate, say, and the breathing to slow down and normalize after like a bear scares you or something. It controls every aspect of digestion from swallowing to peristalsis or movement of the food down the throat and the food or the chyme or the stool throughout your GI tract. It also tells your stomach when food is coming so that it can increase your stomach acid to help with digestion. Allows the opening of the pyloric valve. That's the valve at the base of the stomach to let the food exit from the stomach and go into the intestines. And then it triggers the gallbladder to kick out bile to help digest. And it partially controls the pancreas. It says, okay, food's coming. Could use some digestive enzymes here. And that kicks out some digestive enzymes. Then there's a sphincter called the sphincter of Oddi that is triggered to open. And that allows the release of that bile and the digestive enzymes into the intestines. So it allows you basically to have normal bowel movements too. And I had, again, gotten to the point where I couldn't have a bowel movement. Huge issue.
Yeah.
But what took a while to completely figure out too was that I was dealing with some inflammation, and the vagus nerve is the anti-inflammatory nerve of the body. So if that's not working in your favor, you're going to have more trouble controlling inflammation. And that wasn't my work. That was the work of Dr. Kevin Tracy from the Feinstein Institute of Medicine, but really important research. So over time, as I came to learn it, the problem itself wasn't a nerve problem, and revealing that was what was necessary to fully recover from that issue, because we have to figure out if someone's vagus nerve is a problem, if that a primary or a secondary issue. So that was quite the journey too.
Oh, absolutely. How did you go about fixing the vagus nerve?
Yeah, this is apparently something that other people had never thought to do. And this was where I think a patient who's really trying to figure out what's wrong is perhaps in a better situation than a researcher who's looking from afar. I got to the point where I was completely miserable. I hadn't had a bowel movement in 11 days, and the gastroparesis was something my doctors weren't able to help with. I had gone to my doctor. I'd gone to the emergency room. I ended up by myself with no answers, so I had to dig deeper. But I started to suspect, of course, the vagus nerve going on, and about that time, having no bowel movements, when I was at my doctor, I was having some vague pain in the lower right-hand quadrant of my abdomen, and I asked her, gosh, could this be part of what was going on? And she said, well, maybe that's a kidney stone. Let me have a urologist take a look. And honestly, my gut, it didn't present like a kidney stone. I'd never had a kidney stone before, but it didn't sound like it. But I think she just didn't have any place else to send me. So she sent me to this doctor, and he gave me this dye to drink, and he imaged for a stone. He said, no, there's no stone. And I told him, though, what I was suspecting about the vagus nerve. He was just one of those really nice doctors. He seemed really smart. And I told him I was suspecting that if it was a vagus nerve issue, perhaps this pain I was having or discomfort could be the valve between the large and small intestine, the ileocecal valve. I thought if that's stuck closed, could that be part of the reason? He thought that was amazing. He said, I want you to see a surgeon up the hall, this buddy of his, and see if he could help you. So I saw that surgeon, and he said, no. He said, Diane, if you suspect this is a vagus nerve problem, don't have abdominal surgery unless it's life-threatening because we cut right through those nerves. We cause gastroparesis. And I was horrified, but I appreciated his honesty, and I left his office. I eventually, was at the emergency room. They gave me prokinetics, which did nothing. But then something really weird happened. This is where there may have been a little divine intervention here, right? Because 3 days after that, I had a kidney stone. And again, I'd never had one before. But no, you hear the stories, you know that this has got to be a kidney stone. And I called this doctor and I said, I know you're going to think I'm nuts. I saw you 3 days ago. I didn't have a stone. I respect that. I said, but I have one now. And he met me at the hospital and he removed it. And as soon as I woke up, he said, Diana, you're right. So what? He said, it's your ileocecal valve. I said, oh, wow. How did you know that? He said, well, that dye I gave you 3 days ago is still in there, but it's all crammed up against that valve. So I thought, okay, confirmation. Yay, we have an answer. I said, okay, so what do we do? So I have no idea. I'm here to remove your stone. So I went home and that's where I knew I was on my own. And I didn't know where else to go. So I thought, okay, let's just think this through. And I remembered back to my anatomy in school. And I thought, is there any way, if this nerve is not working for some reason, whatever that reason is, I was considering maybe it was compressed at the neck. But honestly, I had no idea if that was right. So if that's not working for any reason, is there another way I can help myself? And I remembered in optometry school learning the anatomy that there were 2 parts to that nerve. I remembered the long preganglionic portion. It goes in the brain, goes down the neck, into the chest cavity, into the abdomen. And at every branch, there's a gap, or what we call a synapse. And the preganglionic nerve releases a neurotransmitter. It jumps across that synapse, and it lands on a tiny postganglionic vagus nerve. And I remember the instructor saying, the postganglionic vagus nerve is so small, it's almost a part of the organ itself. And it was so weird because it was like I was in school the day before. And I think that's where some of that nerdism came in handy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because why would I remember that? Like 30 some years later. I don't know, but it was like I was there yesterday. And I remember drawing those nerves and memorizing it. And I thought, okay, as far as I know, I still have that postganglionic vagus nerve. Haven't had surgery. Is there a way I could introduce that neurotransmitter and get that postganglionic nerve to work? And I thought, okay, what's the neurotransmitter of that nerve? It's acetylcholine. I thought, well, okay, that won't work because acetylcholine is not a drug. If it's introduced into the body breaks it down immediately. So I thought we need an agonist or an imitator of that neurotransmitter. And I thought, okay, what's the agonist for the vagus nerve at the postganglionic vagus nerve? I thought, oh, well, that's easy. I remember that one because this is the only nicotinic acetylcholinergic nerve in the body. And the reason we say it's nicotinic is its agonist is nicotine. So I called my husband at his office and I said, honey, on the way home from work, could you swing by the drugstore and bring me a nicotine patch? And he was wondering, what the heck are you up to? I said, well, I'll explain it when you get home. But I took that patch, and I didn't know if it mattered where I put it, Mike. But I thought, let's just put it in the lower right-hand quadrant in the area of that ileocecal valve. And I pictured the nicotine going through the skin. Of course, it's transdermal, going down through the tissue, and maybe landing on the receptor, that postganglionic nerve, and maybe triggering bowel movement. And an hour and a half after putting that patch on, things started moving, the valves opened, and I had a normal bowel movement. I thought, what the heck? I used it every day for 4 days, and then by the 4th day, nicotine sadly activates inflammatory cells. Not good. My stomach was purple. I had hives. It looked like I had been attacked by fire ants, and I couldn't keep using it. But it taught me something. Actually, it taught me a couple things. And one was either this was a vagus nerve problem, but a preganglionic vagus nerve problem, or a neurotransmitter problem. This likely was not an autoimmune condition affecting the receptor, because the receptor worked great. So we could dig deeper into trying to figure out if it was a vagus nerve problem or an acetylcholine problem. And that is so important, because if it's an acetylcholine problem, if we try to trigger that nerve in any way, be it, splash water on your face or gargle or meditate or whatever, it's not going to be effective. So that was yet the next aspect of the journey.
So you figure out that it's not intracranial pressure.
Mm-hmm.
The vagus nerve presynapse or acetylcholine problem. Am I?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so how many years in are you at this point?
Gosh, it was probably at about, it took 3.5, close to 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what comes next? Because you're making headway, and you're kind of like discovering a new land here.
Right.
Honestly, and I'm thinking about this as you're telling the story. There are so many little things that had to fall into place, that if it's happened to someone else, that then the diagnoses would be all over the place.
Right. I'd probably be in a mental institution at this point, honestly.
And you wouldn't have helped the number of people that you've helped in your research. It's remarkable, the fact that you run into a surgeon, because surgeons do surgery, and he says, well, actually, no, Diana, you don't need surgery. You need to do this. Like, there's a lot of divine intervention, I want to say, that's at play, as Einstein's spooky entanglement that occurs. So where do you go from here? Where did you go after discovering this part of it?
Yeah, and I have got to mention to you, Mike, I know when I look back and when I even sharing the story with you, you see some divine intervention or this just can't all be coincidence, right? But at the time, I felt like there was anything but divine intervention.
Oh, God, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was so long and so much suffering. And when you're going through that, you feel all alone, especially when I would talk to my doctors about vagus nerve, or even I talked to my cardiologist about when I was working through this. I said, I'm trying to figure out a good agonist for the postganglionic vagus nerve, and he looked at me like I had two heads. And he said, I don't remember the anatomy. It's like, oh, that's scary, okay. And he said, I talked to your neurologist, and I talked to the neurologist, and he said, well, honestly, Diana, I remember there's a postganglionic vagus nerve, but I just don't remember the neurotransmitters. I felt like I was in the twilight zone and totally alone. So now I can see more of the perspective you're seeing, but at the time, no, I didn't exactly see that. But I was reaching out to so many people at that time. I had a blog, or still do actually, called Pretty Ill, and I set it up as a video really just to reach out to other patients to say, oh, this is bad and this is real, and don't believe anybody if they say this is all in your head or it's not a real medical problem. This is bad. And I told my husband, when the doctors figure this out, because I thought they would, they'll be surprised we could survive through this. That's how significant it was. And I wanted other people to know. Then when we were figuring out things like, oh, looks like intracranial pressure is involved, I reached out to others then. So I did want to get answers for others. It wasn't just all about myself and our kids. There were so many people suffering. So one thing I did when I was trying to figure out if it was a preganglionic vagus nerve problem or an acetylcholine problem was I sent out symptom spreadsheets, and these went across the world, which was so amazing. And we looked at chronic fatigue syndrome, POTS, fibromyalgia, and interestingly, PTSD. They also end up with autonomic dysfunction. And in those spreadsheets, I put some symptoms and I just scattered them out, some really strange symptoms, or that could appear strange, like sometimes I see dancing lines and spiders, or I have visual snow. And when I looked at those results, I saw the majority of patients in all those categories dealt with, on and off, the majority of symptoms of anticholinergic poisoning. So I knew then this wasn't a vagus nerve problem. This was an acetylcholine problem causing the vagus nerve problem. And one reason that's so important is acetylcholine is also used by the brain for cognition, for short-term memory. It wasn't a small difference. If we didn't figure that out, patients could be left just trying to stimulate their vagus nerve and not get the answers they need. So that was the next important step.
And is that why you had to stop using the nicotine? Is that how you discovered? Yeah.
Well, honestly, I had to stop using the nicotine because nicotine can activate inflammatory cells. And it's got some dark side too. It also increases oxidation, which is damaging. It encourages the release of some chemicals like elastase and collagenase that break down tissue. So that wasn't pretty, but it helped get the answers. So instead, I thought, how great would it be if we could figure out a way to combine oral ingredients in a way that it could stimulate that postganglionic vagus nerve, just like nicotine did, cross the blood-brain barrier where it's also needed, support the parasympathetic nervous system without using nicotine and activating the inflammation. So I set about trying to figure this out, digging into my ancient organic chemistry knowledge. And trust me when I say ancient, Mike, it was ancient. Trying to put this together, sitting in the kitchen, honestly, trying to put this together and giving what I thought would work to my son and I to get those organs working again. Like my gallbladder, it completely shut down. They wanted me to remove it. The ejection fraction was 8%. And I remember talking to the doctor about that, saying, well, is it like filled with gallstones, or is it like an appendix where it's going to burst or something? And they said, no, it looks fine. So, okay, is the opening stuck closed? That could be a problem. And they said, no, it looks fine. I thought, well, it doesn't sound like, one, it's urgent to remove it, but two, it sounded neurological to me. I said, it sounds like it's sitting there just waiting quietly for someone to say, it's time to work, And I said, if I can figure this out, I want to try to do that. And I want to hang on to this if I can. And fortunately, I figured it out. So came up with an oral mix could actually stimulate that postganglionic vagus nerve to work. I could get the reassurance that the nerve was working, therefore the organs would come back, cross the blood-brain barrier to boost cognition, and amazingly allow me to stay awake again, and then ultimately to start thinking, getting my executive function back. And then about 4 to 6 weeks in, we did so many studies on this, we noticed, oh, look, the dry eyes went away too. Of course, the lacrimal gland helps produce tears, and that's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. So we took years to figure this out, and I was patient 1. My son was patient 2. And, we're able to come up with something we now call Parasym Plus.
That's Parasym Plus, correct?
Right. For the parasympathetic nervous system plus, it crosses the blood-brain barrier to help with acetylcholine. And that was such a strange part of the journey where it was at that time was when I was awake maybe 3 hours a day, and I was barely able to stay awake those 3 hours. My neurologist was convinced I had some neurodegenerative condition, and I presented that way. I understand that. But fortunately, That wasn't what the problem was. I was so depleted in this neurotransmitter. I didn't have enough to rub two brain cells together, but it immediately started to come back, which was a real godsend.
That's fascinating. Hey, folks, I'll put a link in the show notes to Parasym Plus on Diana's site so that you can look it up. So you're now deep into this. You're making some really interesting discoveries for yourself, for your family. We know now that it's not a vagus nerve problem. It is just the side effect, but it is an acetylcholine problem.
Right. So important.
All right. So what you've actually got a patent now on the Parasym Plus for dry eyes, correct?
Right. In fact, yeah, that's the second patent, which was very validating. Patent attorneys are very, very difficult to work with. They do not want patents for supplement mixes, but this was truly a new discovery. No one had ever thought to try to come up with something orally to stimulate that nerve. Never done it. So it was very validating to get that. But yeah, it was a necessary component not only to recovery, but then to get next steps too. I was convinced initially when we saw that likely acetylcholine was the issue itself. Maybe there's a genetic problem with acetylcholine. I had to go down so many tangents with this, Mike, but I had created genetic disease investigators to run these studies through, and I thought, yeah, my mind was on genes and looked into that. And that was a problem for some people, but it wasn't a problem for this vast majority. It wasn't like the magic bullet I thought it was going to be, but we still had to put workarounds into Parasym Plus to cover for those genetic issues. I didn't want people to have to know their genes to know if it would help them. And
that is fascinating. So how does POTS care differ from other clinics treating POTS?
Yes, talk about a dream come true, Mike, to go from being this sick to starting to get answers. And I remember thinking along the journey when I didn't know if I would ever recover. We didn't know if we'd be able to pull together enough answers to get there. It was always a dream, but talk about a dream come true, to be able to actually help other people with this beast of a condition. I have to pause and pinch myself sometimes. But in POTS care, we had to do this differently because the traditional treatment for POTS is basically to try to increase blood volume, high salt, beta blockers to slow the heart down, and antidepressants was a typical treatment, or telling people they just need to really try harder. That was just so wrong, and I was just getting worse. We had to figure out the medical issues driving the POTS in order to have a chance to recover. So to be able to shorten people's journeys, they don't have to go on a 12-year journey like my kids and I did, and get them back to a normal life is super rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me. I mean, you've really gone in depth with what was involved, but talk to me about what was recovery like. I mean, you've gotten your life back.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This was so strange, Mike, and being able to pause and think about what I went through, right? I didn't see the ending of it when I was in the middle of it. How could you, right? And seeing the kids suffer and everything was so horrible for so long. Most people don't get a second chance like that. Had the illness maybe lasted 3 years, I probably would have just jumped right back into eye care or something. But excuse me, this was such a long journey. So trying to even imagine being functional again, I couldn't go there for a while. Sure. So it was almost like having Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, some horrible, horrible conditions where normally you just suffer, 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 and then that's it. But to suffer, 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 and then, whoop, come right back and to dive into normalcy was such an amazingly, shocking journey. It took a while for my mind to catch up to it, I guess, the way to look at it. But seeing the kids recover was super amazing. But then I always anticipated that I'd have challenges, but to have those over time just start to dissipate and have more and more normalcy come in, where I think I have more energy and a fuller schedule than most 20-year-olds. I didn't anticipate that. So every day I'm thankful. I will never take anything else for granted in life, that's for sure, when you've been through such a long journey. And it's super rewarding to help others.
I'm extremely grateful for you getting on the phone today with me to talk about your journey. And I am very cognizant of your time. Is there anything you'd like to say before we leave today?
And I'm not sure who is listening who's dealing with some medical journey, but I will tell you, having gone through this once, I know how tough it is, but don't ever, ever lose hope in looking for your answers, because there are answers for these conditions. I think in what I dealt with, what my kids dealt with, no one was looking deeply enough. And I think I had the advantage of actually being a sick person. So being in the body of one really helped. But there are answers, and there is always, always hope. Even in the darkest of times, do know that. So, and it's amazing what we can recover from when it's addressed properly.
Absolutely. I think your journey was amazing. Again, thank you for taking the time out to share it with the world. It is amazing to me that the people that are in the health and wellness space, it seems that we've all had to go through something, and then it's one thing to go through it and pop out the other end, and it's
Right.
something completely different to be in service of others. And that's what you're doing. You're changing people's lives. When I look at this, Diana, it amazes me because relieving intracranial pressure, that could be by having a shunt put in your head.
Mm-hmm.
They could have removed your gallbladder. They could,
Right.
like, there's so many things, not even to mention the psychological aspects. If you didn't have, the doctors are in the right church, they're just in the wrong pew, and they're trying to help, but you had the drive to
Yeah.
seek out the answers. That's
Right.
amazing. That's
Well,
truly amazing.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. I honestly, the biggest driver was my kids being sick.
Absolutely.
Both the kids were sick. My daughter was more functional. She was able to stay in school, but she was still suffering. And then my son was completely bedridden. So missing 3 years of school, that was really the motivation. And that's what drove me. We just had to get the answers. So I'd love to say it was all super altruistic, but boy, a mama bear looking for answers for the kids was really helpful. And that
Absolutely.
it's just so wrong the way I see so many patients treated today, or they're told oftentimes it's suggested that it is them being weak or it's somehow their fault. And I am on a mission to change how this condition and others, some of these invisible illnesses are seen, because it is not the patient's fault. And we are not working hard enough to get those answers. And those answers are somewhere. And we can find those if we work hard enough. So I want to change how patients are treated and viewed, and ultimately see their recoveries also.
Awesome. Diana, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Folks, if you like what you heard, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review or like it. And we are greatly appreciative of that. It helps us to help others find the work that we're doing here. And if you want to sign up for our weekly newsletter, by all means, you could visit our website. I am really grateful for our time together, Diane, and we'll see you soon, folks. Ciao.
It's Dr. Noah, and I'm back. I suspect you loved listening to this week's podcast release. So the December book of the month is Keto for Life. Reset your biological clock in 21 days and optimize your diet for longevity. I interviewed the co-author, Brad Kearns, and it was great. The podcast interview discussing this book will be released in December for your listening pleasure. The link to purchase the book will be in the show notes and weekly emails. Collectively, we talked about having a Black Friday or Cyber Monday special, and we decided to step it up a notch. For the month of December, the entire BYWG nutrition line will be 10% off using the code all lowercase BYWG GIFT. Check out the line on our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com or check out the BYWG podcast, where during the month of December we will release a brand new podcast discussing the supplements. In our archives, we also highlight one of the supplements in a very deep way each and every month. Our product of the month is a worthy repeat, a company that I've been a member of for over 3 years, and that's Dry Farm Wines. During the holidays, a healthier bottle of wine is always worth searching for, and Dry Farm Wine fits the bill. We have a special offer for a penny bottle of wine using the code found in the show notes, weekly emails, and social media. It's real easy, folks. www.dryfarmwines.com/BYWG. Dry Farm Wines features low alcohol, extremely low sugar, carb-free, very low sulfates, and mycotoxin-free. Pay attention for holiday special wine deals offered throughout the month, and don't worry, we'll keep you in the loop. Thank you for your time, and be awesome, and never